Well, I am delighted to say that joining us on the Godcast today, well, to be honest, he doesn't really need any introduction. It's the one and only George Galloway. How are you, George?
It's a pleasure, Father, to be on something called the Godcast. How could I possibly turn that down? Thank you.
Whereabouts in the world are you today? Where do we catch you from?
I am right now in London, but my home is in South Scotland,
Okay, whereabouts in Scotland? I'm quite fond of Scotland.
in the borders.
Okay, yeah, we have a family member who's kind of around Dumfries area. It's absolutely beautiful around there on the coastline.
It's very beautiful, yeah. And
Yeah.
of course, it's my ancestral land. My name's not Galloway for nothing.
No, absolutely. So, George, if, hopefully this will be a little bit different to the regular interviews. I'm not uh, planning to drag you over the coals or anything like that. I'd just like to perhaps start by just finding out a little bit about yourself, George. So, where was home as a boy for George Galloway?
I was born in what was once a village, but by then had become basically an adjunct of the city of Dundee. The area that I was born in was called Lochee, Lochee, and was known as Tipperary. Was almost entirely composed of Irish immigrants. Some old immigrants from the early part of the 20th century, and many from the 1920s and 30s. The overwhelming majority of the people amongst whom I grew up had Irish accents or Irish cultural values, at least.
Okay. And was it a happy childhood? Was it something you reflect on fondly?
Very, very, very happy. I was uh, born into just about as poor circumstances as were around in 1954. I came home from the maternity hospital to live for nearly 5 years in a one-room attic, a sloping roof, making even a cot impossible. And so I literally slept as a baby in a drawer. It was very poor. Outside toilet, of course. I thought that's all there was. We shared the outside toilet with 5 other families, so the seat was always warm. We had no bath. Went to the public baths in St. Mary's Lochee once a week, I'm sorry to say, as was the habit of working class people at that time. I
Yeah.
washed my hair once a week with a sachet of shampoo. How things have changed. But when I was 5, we moved into a brand new, spanking new council house. You could still smell the cement. You could the other parts of the street were still being built, and everywhere around were building sites of new council houses going up. So that would have been in 1959
Okay.
when council houses were being built in the hundreds of thousands every year, unlike today, of course. And that marked a tremendous step up in the world from a one-room attic. We had an inside toilet, bath, garden, front and back, and a brand new school at the foot of the path, and a brand new set of industrial units built in the post-war period, and business redirected for my father to work in. And he worked for more than 20 years at the top of that road in the National Cash Register Company. So yeah, tremendously
Yeah.
happy. One mum, one dad, loving parents. And although we didn't have much in the way of material things, we had much more important things than that.
Yeah. And was there any aspect of it is the Godcast, George? Was there any aspect of faith in the family as a boy?
Very much. My mother's side of the family were devout Roman Catholics. My father not so, but with absolutely no animus towards religion, completing as he did the Karl Marx quote, which is often only half used. Marx said, religion is the opium of the people, but he went on in the same sentence to say, the last sigh of the oppressed, the heart of the heartless world. And that's how I've always looked on religion.
Yeah. Georgia, we've had the BBC at our church this week, and there was a quite a well-respected journalist with us, and I just asked, if he knew if you were a man of faith. Are you a man of faith or not?
Very much so. I am a strong believer in God and have always publicly proclaimed so, which doesn't gain me much credit in liberal and so-called progressive circles. They regard that as a mark of cultural conservatism, and they say that as if it's a bad thing. But I'm very strongly a man of faith, yes.
Well, I'm just interested to get you this. This is part of the political week on the Godcast, and I was talking to Isabel Short about these things. Tim Farron gave up his leadership of the Liberal Party predominantly, I think, because of his faith. What was your take on that when that happened, George?
It's a sign of the times. He'd chosen the wrong party if he wanted to be mindful of God. He chose the wrong party because liberals and so-called progressives in general have no time for faith and have no time for the idea of God. They think that we are somehow infantilized by such belief. Although, as I always point out, believing that all of this came from nothing is a far more far-fetched idea than believing that a creator made it and set it in motion.
Yeah. And has your faith changed over the years through circumstances and things you've observed and seen, or has it been a bit of a steady ship on this one?
Steady, but if anything, stronger. The more I know, the more I look around the earth and the heavens, the more convinced I am that this is all God's creation, and that whatever happens has at least been set in motion by God. For example, there are some people who don't believe in the theory of evolution. I'm not one of those. All I say is, if there has been evolution, then God must have intended it that way. That seems to me a much more rational explanation of things than that one moment there was nothing, literally nothing, and that out of that nothing came something. And not just something, but that life on earth may well have begun as amoeba in the swamp, but it ended in Pavarotti and Michelangelo, and that cannot be an accident.
Okay, I like that. I might use that. George, you've said you believed in God. So the next question is, are you a Christian, or you have leanings to other faith groups?
Well, I'm absolutely open to all faiths. You know the old saying, once a Catholic, always a Catholic. So that would be my stock answer. But I'm a believer in all the monotheistic faiths and treat each and every one of them with equal respect.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair enough. George, you are, there's little doubt you are quite a controversial figure. And when I advertised on the Godcast that you'd be coming on, the reaction was quite unusual. Some people were delighted and can't wait to see this interview when it goes out. And some people have contacted me and saying, well, that's all very well, but I won't be entertaining George Galloway with my presence. Why do you think that is? You're a bit of a Marmite politician, aren't you?
Well, any politician worthy of the name takes a stand on things, is a signpost and not a weather vane, as Mr. Ben once put it. Any politician worthy of the name and anyone who was doing the name justice would take firm stands on things, point people in a direction that they may very well at first not want to go. But it's vital that we have such leadership, and it's the lack of it that's left us in the mess that we are in. If I take one example, I take it because it's been the quickest and most comprehensive transformation in public opinion about me in my lifetime, though there have been others. When I stood against the invasion and occupation of Iraq, I was excoriated as mad or bad or both. But now you can't find anyone anywhere who will any longer say that the invasion and occupation of Iraq has been a good thing. I would literally, if I did an Oxford Union debate on it, I'd probably have to argue both sides myself, because no one will show up in polite company and argue that what I was saying back in 2002, 2003 was wrong. So as vindications go, that one is just about as complete and as rapid as we're likely to get.
Okay. George, where did this, you've obviously got a deep passion for politics. Where did that begin for you? Were you a teenager? Was it even before that, or was it a little bit later in life?
No, it was before that. I grew up in a political household. We didn't have a breakfast table, so the cliche doesn't work. But sitting around the fire, we discussed political events. My parents were both very strong Labour activists. I remember in 1964, for several weeks, there was no daylight in our house because all of our windows were given over to full-size posters for Mr. Wilson and his slogan, "Let's go with Labour," which was the winning slogan in 1964. My father was an engineering worker and a stalwart of the engineering union, the AEU as it then was. My mother, with her Irish background, had a very strong anti-imperialist set of beliefs. And that's the atmosphere in which I grew up. I was giving out leaflets in elections in short trousers long before I was 10. I joined the Labour Party at the age of 13. You're supposed to be 15, but I then had the benefit of looking older than I was, a process which I'm glad to say has gone into reverse. And I've spent all of my life, therefore, in politics, one way or another.
Yeah. George, can I ask you, I interviewed Giles Fraser, who I'm sure you've heard of and know, recently, talking about the Middle East and some of the issues there. And I asked him the question, do you think that the West cares enough? And he suggested that they didn't. And it was perhaps because they're too entwined in their own battles in the UK. Can I ask you the same question? Do you think the West cares enough about these places?
Well, there are always people in any society who think outside the box, who think outside the prevailing orthodoxy. And there's nothing wrong with believing that charity begins at home, as long as it doesn't end at home. There's nothing wrong with pride and patriotism in one's country and its people and their achievements. I myself would put myself in that bracket. But to believe that any man is an island entire unto himself would be wrong, even if you do live geographically in an island. That it's just as wrong and just as foolish as believing that because you're very wealthy and comfortable inside your own gated community, that it doesn't matter what life is like over the barbed wire, even in your own country. It's not just not moral, and it is not moral, but it is damagingly self-harming as a nostrum. Because, of course, if you are surrounded by a sea of misery, that sea will come through your barbed wire fence one day. And ditto on the international level. A good example of it is in the current refugee crisis in Europe. The current refugee crisis is a direct result of war, famine, pestilence, and disease in poor countries, about which the rich countries did too little, and too often the rich countries were directly complicit. A good example being the wars of the last 20 years. You destroy country after country after country, and then act all surprised when they wash up, literally wash up on your beach.
Yeah, thank you, George. I want to just move on a little bit from that. In January of this year, just before lockdown, I was fortunate enough to go to the Holy Land, George, and it was an amazing trip for me. It kind of highlighted some of my own naivety about the issues there, and it just seems that there seems to be a real struggle out there. And I want to ask you, George, is there any room for empathy in the Holy Land crisis? Is Northern Ireland an example of what can happen?
Yes, potentially, as is South Africa. The stronger community, the one which has lauded it for a very long time, has to recognize the humanity of the oppressed and has to share power with the oppressed. That happened after a very long struggle in South Africa, in which I was very proud to have played a part, more of a part than most, having been one of the only people on the left in Britain to travel the length and breadth of apartheid South Africa, undercover for the African National Congress, then led by Nelson Mandela from prison. It is happening in the north of Ireland, but it is definitely not yet happening in the Terra Santa, in the Holy Land. But the time may come. It's not guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed in life. But the time may come when that begins to happen. But there's no sight of it on the horizon, I'm afraid.
George, I also interviewed Reverend Richard Shule, who's the Dean of the St. George's College in Jerusalem, and he explained beautifully some of the fragility that's in the place. But maybe I'm naive, but when I was in the old city of Jerusalem, what struck me was Christians, Jews, and Muslims were, I don't know if flourishing is the right word, but they were living alongside each other. And I find it a really beautiful and incredibly spiritual experience, but obviously breaking out from that and meeting some of the Palestinians and their circumstances and the oppression that they're under, it was absolutely heartbreaking. But if you could wave a magic wand, George, and bring a solution to the Holy Land, what needs to happen?
Well, the only real solution is a binational state of Israel-Palestine, in which everyone, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, live as equal citizens under the law. And the prospects of that are exceedingly small at this point in time. When Mandela was asked by the white nationalists of the Orange Free State if they could have the Orange Free State as a white state inside South Africa, he answered, "We don't believe in white states or black states. We only believe in democratic states." And that is the only answer. in the Holy Land for one man, one woman, one vote under a constitution, preserving the religious and national rights of all communities living between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. This talk, endless talk and no action about a two-state solution is absolutely dead in the water. Just this very day, another 1,500 settlement units were announced to be built on the rapidly vanishing Palestinian land that was supposedly to be the Palestinian state in the Oslo agreements, which I supported at the time, but which I say are completely extinct now. There's no part of the so-called Palestinian state which is not already settled with gigantic, and by settlements people need to know, as you will have seen yourself, we're not talking about rolled wagons and tents here. We're talking about cities with fountains and swimming pools and huge housing developments. The land has been paved and built and taken. And so no separation of this territory is any longer possible. And therefore, equal rights for all the people living there is the only remaining solution.
What's your feeling to the general Israeli Joe Bloggs on the street?
Well, I have lived in Israel many times, and for long months I have many Israeli friends. And some of the people I respect the most in the world are citizens of Israel and living there. Gideon Levy, for example, the great Haaretz writer, the most courageous writer operating on the earth today, is of course an Israeli Jew. And I lived in Shankin Street in Tel Aviv, not far from Dizengoff Square, for very long periods of time. It matters nothing to me what nationality someone is, still less what their religion is. What matters to me is what they believe in and what they do. It's nothing to do with labels into which people were born. Where we're all born is of course entirely accidental.
George, if I can just expand that out a little bit, because I'm mindful of time, but I'm really keen to get your views on numerous things. So I interviewed a gentleman called Father Nadim Nassar. He's the only Anglican priest in the UK who's actually from Syria, and he spoke so beautifully about Syria and described it as another people's war that's going on there. And the victim of that is the bleeding of the beautiful people from Syria, the talent, the brains, the creativity, the artists. If I can put these into, how do you see the Syrian conflict at the moment? And if you can go into another thing, is just want to ask about Iraq. How do you see Iraq as a nation now?
Well, as this is the Godcast, let me begin by saying that the holiest place I have ever been was not the Vatican, but a town called Malula, which is the Christian heart of Syria, the beating heart of Christian Arab civilization. They speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus himself. They have literally carved into the mountains and caves the most exquisite churches, chapels, monasteries, nunneries, and I grew to love them very much indeed, and I have been there many times. And of course, Malula was briefly overrun by the head-chopping, heart-eating maniacs of the so-called Islamist revolution in Syria, and nuns and priests and even a bishop were decapitated. The holy places were desecrated, and it's probably a surprise to your viewers to learn that Britain and the United States and France were on the side of the heart-eating, head choppers rather than the priests and the nuns in Malula. We have spent a decade giving ceaseless propaganda and material support to these so-called revolutionists who, if they had their way, would religiously cleanse from Syria all traces of not just any other religion, but any other interpretation of their own religion to their own narrow, fanatic interpretation. And I hope that answers your question. It breaks my heart, almost literally, what has happened to Syria. I believe that the Syrians are the finest of all the Arab people, that Syria is the last castle of Arab dignity. I call on all Syrian refugees to return to their country and rebuild it after what has now been virtually a decade of foreign-sponsored destruction. I once was trapped in a lift with William Hague, then the Foreign Secretary of Great Britain. I said to him, William, you've been wrong before. In fact, you've been wrong all your life, but you've never...
Oh.
Said to William, William, you've been wrong before. In fact, you've been wrong all your life, but you've never been insane before. And what you're doing in Syria is literally insane. If it succeeds, Al-Qaeda and ISIS will fly their black flag over Damascus, right next door to Israel, and on the Mediterranean and the gateway to Europe. And if you fail, all these people to whom you've given sharp knives will one day come into this very building, and they'll be looking for you and they'll be looking for me. These people that you are tooling up in Syria will not remain forever in Syria. They will cascade around the world, including into our own country, and they will seek to murder and maim here as they did there. I invited them to read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein right to the end, because if you read it to the end, you know that once you've created a monster, you no longer can control it. That's why it's called a monster. And that's what we have been doing in Syria and elsewhere for many years in the world. As to Iraq, Iraq has been destroyed, as I predicted that it would be. It has spawned not just the 100,000 Al-Qaeda that I predicted to Mr. Blair in the last conversation I ever had with him in the library corridor of the House of Commons, outside the gentleman's lavatory to be precise, but it has spawned something even worse than Al-Qaeda, ISIS, to which I have just referred. Iraq is broken and will never again be put together, and will be a source of misery and trouble for the people of Iraq and the surrounding area, and indeed the world for many, many decades to come.
George, that's a very sobering kind of assessment of matters out there. You know, and you know, I'm quite naive about Iraq, I'll be honest, but the Syrian situation is utterly heartbreaking, and it just seems to roll on and on and on, and where the end game is, that I'm not sure if you can say where the end game will be or if we're anywhere near it.
Well, I do urge, Father, all Christians to talk to Syrian Christians, to Palestinian Christians, to Iraqi Christians. That's not asking much. That the leaders and the congregations of Christian churches listen to what is being said by their co-religionists in the countries that we're bombing and invading and occupying. And if they did do that, they'd get a very different perspective to the prevailing narrative.
Yeah. George, I'm mindful of time. I've got a raft of questions, but something I'd like to ask, you know, I'm a Christian, is probably quite obvious, but and talk to kind of teach the values to love thy neighbour, and that's quite easy when things are going well in one's life. But if you've felt betrayed or you've been let down, then that becomes a bit more of a challenge. And I'm sure I've upset individuals, maybe through a sermon or whatever. But I was wondering if you have any regrets. Are there any times where you can think where you crossed the line? Because you are controversial, you have a very strong opinion. But just looking back, have you regretted any of the times where you've, of course, maybe inflicted sadness on someone, as we all have?
Well, only a fool has no regrets, and I'm not a fool. So, of course, I have 1,000 regrets, mainly on personal things, but on one or two public things. I have a conscience. I believe that conscience is one's daily communion with God. God speaks to us every day through our conscience. We know when we are doing wrong, and we may choose to carry on regardless, but our conscience ensures that we do in fact know, and I believe that that conscience is God's daily communion with all of us.
Yeah.
I have absolutely no regrets on the big political questions that I have been involved with throughout my life. I haven't changed my essential view of the world and of humanity ever, and I don't expect to now at this age. Could I have expressed my views differently? Might I have been more gentle with this opponent or that? Yes, of course. But when you speak as many millions of words as me, don't forget I broadcast on television 7 days a week. In fact, the fact that I pre-record some of them, oftentimes I'm on 10 times a week on
This is
television.
your mother of all talk shows, isn't it?
Well, I have lots of shows. I broadcast 5 days a week on RT America. I broadcast every fortnight on an Arab television station called Al Mayadeen, a program called Kalima Hurra, which means free word, and that goes out fortnightly. And I present a program on RT UK called Sputnik every Saturday. And my big enchilada is the mother of all talk shows, with an audience of 1 million people plus every single week, which knocks the BBC, Sky and ITV and Channel 4 all put together into a cocked hat, I'm glad to say. So they don't invite me on anymore. And if they did, I wouldn't go because I'm too busy talking to larger numbers of people myself. So by the grace of God, a bit of talent and a lot of hard work, I have built up my own media platforms, and I rarely agree to be interviewed by other people now. I do the interviewing now.
Well, look at that. What a coup. What a coup.
I only did it for you because, as I said, who could refuse a request from the Godcast?
George, one thing that strikes me is whether you agree with you politically or not, you are a beautiful orator, aren't you? You have a beautiful way with language. Where did you get that passion for use of words? Do you like poetry and things like that?
Yes, it's a bit like Jack Nicklaus when he played a wonderful shot once and someone said that was a lucky shot. And he said, yes, it's a miracle. The more I practice, the luckier I get. So one needs an innate ability to speak, but the more you practice, the better you get. And if you speak as much as me for as long as me, there would be something far wrong if you hadn't gotten good on it by my age. So I did kiss the Blarney Stone in Ireland, twice in fact. You had to be, at my age, as a small kid, you had to be held by the ankles upside down in order to kiss it. But I did kiss it twice. and
Well, there
it's
you go.
stood me in good stead. I've got the blarney. I've got the gift of the
You
gab.
definitely have, mate. You definitely have. Just quickly, I mean, people. I invited people to ask questions, and you won't be surprised that Big Brother came up. Is that something you regret? The old Pussycat
Oh,
Malarkey. I mean, I love that show. I loved it.
yeah. No, not at all. My only regret is that I did it too well. If I had not done it so well, it might not have stayed in people's minds for so long. No, I did it for several 100,000 reasons. Pound notes that went to the Palestinian refugees in Gaza when there was not a big queue of people ready to put shoes on their children's feet and food in their children's stomachs. So no, I don't regret it at all, but I wouldn't do it again.
No. George, just quickly, when you're not doing politics, what do you like to do to wind down? What do you enjoy?
Football.
You like your
Football,
footy?
father. I would watch two pub teams playing and then listen to their managers being interviewed after the game.
Which leads
I can't get enough football.
Which leads me to a standard question on the Godcast, because I'm from Burnley. Have you been to Turf Moor?
I have, as a matter of fact, on the very day that my hometown club, Dundee, won the Scottish League Championship for the one and only time, Burnley won the English League Championship for the one and only time. I think it was season 62-63, and I was there at Muirton Park in Perth when Dundee won and Burnley won the English League the same day. As a matter of fact, two of my sons play in the same football teams on their kids, under 14s and under 9s. And two of my sons play in the same teams as several of the Burnley players. So I get to see them on the touchline when I'm there. So I have been to Turf Moor. I'm a Celtic supporter, first and foremost. Manchester United is my England team. But a good friend of mine, Willie Morgan on the wing, played for both Burnley and Manchester United. And I'm in regular touch with him.
Well, I recently interviewed a guy who played for Burnley and for Celtic, a gentleman called Andy Payton, who was a great striker for us at Burnley and played for you some years ago.
Yes.
George, I'm going to let you go in a minute, but as a man of faith, what is your prayer for the Middle East, George, please, before we go?
My prayer for the Middle East would be that unity might be found, that other differences, schematic, sectarian, confessional, religious differences be set aside. Because if unity could be found, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Persian Gulf would be one mighty polity. All that oil, all that gas, all that water, all those people, one God, it would be something to be reckoned with. It would be much more significant than almost every other continent or subcontinent on the globe. But those who wish to divide on these false bases have done a good job, and the divisions are very deep and lasting. So though I pray to God for that, I don't expect that prayer immediately to be answered.
No, but it is one that we can all, of all different denominations and faiths, can share and support. So for that, George, I thank you. George, it's been really lovely to meet you. Thank you for your comments and for giving me the cue of coming and doing an interview with us on the Godcast. And we send our love to you and your family in London. And thank you, George, for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. God bless.